Let's bring in Misty Marris, trial attorney, legal analyst, for a little bit more on this. She's not frozen. Look at her face is moving.
I'm moving, yes.
So we might get Alex a further explanation, but let me start on this. They were arguing back and forth about this phone call that he mentioned, and I know there's been a lot of back and forth about the ammunition, dummy bullets that are used versus live bullets. What do you think of what you've heard so far in the Baldwin trial?
So what was really mind-boggling is that what came out today is that another actor actually had a live bullet in his prop gun as well. So this whole case, the defense is taking the idea that live bullets were on the set, and that is truly incomprehensible from the perspective of any movie set, that there's no way Alec Baldwin would have had any knowledge that that gun could have been a gun that could kill someone, that had a live round in it. So that's really what this is. And you heard the defense say, it doesn't really matter whether or not he pulled the trigger. The fact is, because he has no knowledge of a bullet being live or being real, that he cannot be held criminally liable.
See Baldwin in court right now. You've seen his expressions, wearing the glasses there and kind of staring over the monitor at the testimony that's happening. So we have cameras in the courtroom, which always makes it more interesting for us watching it from the outside to get a sense of what people are doing. I want to play a little bit of the testimony from earlier, which I think gets into what you're talking about on the ammunition. Let's watch.
Mr. Eccles, another actor on the set, turns out that he, as he acted, as he performed, had a live bullet in his bandolier, correct?
Yes.
And you have no reason to think Mr. Eccles had any idea that was there, right?
Correct.
That's what you're saying. He had a live bullet and had no idea. I mean, what's going on this movie set?
Another gun with a live bullet. And your further testimony indicated that the live bullets, from a non-expert perspective, a layman's not going to be able to tell the difference. So this is all in the defense furtherance to really put that accountability onto the armorer and others who were responsible for the gun on the set. Now, keep in mind, this evidentiary hearing, Alex Capriello started to tell us about it, but there's something really relevant to this point that's actually going to come into the courtroom. So this was all about a phone call between Alec Baldwin, Hilaria Baldwin, and shows that he, from the prosecution's perspective, was a little bit callous, said, we can still have fun, everybody come to New Mexico. He doesn't know Helena Hutchins is dead at the time. That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is a portion of the transcript where he says, dummy bullets can kill, blanks can kill. Prosecutors,
where Alec Baldwin says
correct. Prosecutors got that in. So their argument is now going to be that regardless of whether or not the bullet was live, was fake, whatever it was, he, in his head, knew that handling the gun recklessly, whether it's a live bullet or a dummy round, could cause serious injury or death. So that was a victory for the prosecutors.
So the evidence that's in or out can often be so important in cases like this. And I thought it was interesting that he was ruled, pre-trial to not be considered a producer. We talked about that on the show yesterday. So that was probably a victory for Baldwin, right? And now this, you say, could go the other way.
Correct. And that was a third part of that very evidentiary hearing, was the prosecution trying to get in information about a safety memo that Baldwin had been aware of. Judge said, no, that speaks to his role as a producer. That's all precluded. But that statement, it is a transcript. It is his words. Dummy bullets can kill. And so that's going to be used to speak to a reckless state of mind. That's what this case is all about.
Now, before we get back to politics and what Biden's going to do and everything with the news conference, one more thing on the legal story, if you can, today. Menendez. We haven't talked too much in the last few days about Senator Menendez of New Jersey, but I know they started jury instructions there, second corruption trial, this bribery trial, salacious information about all kinds of things during the trial. Where do you see this going?
Well, so the prosecutors in their closing, we heard them really making those connections specifically to Menendez, saying that it's pretty ridiculous that he's not aware. He's the politician. He's the one. He's involved in these conversations and pointing to that evidence. The defense, their defense was really, hey, the prosecutors did not fulfill their burden. That was really the crux of it, that they didn't fulfill their burden under the law. Of course, something you always hear, the burden is on the prosecutors. Now the jury's getting the instructions. Arguably, that's the most important part of the case, and it will be up for the jurors to assess the credibility of witnesses. The witness, I think, was most compelling, the guy who pled guilty and spoke directly about this bribery scheme with Menendez. So we'll see what the jury says. They're the finders of fact, but I'm thinking you're going to see a conviction.
Now, people some people look on the outside and say, well, how credible are these witnesses? They're essentially criminals themselves. But then people like you come in and tell me, well, that's always the way it is almost all the time. And these types of witnesses, you're not getting the altar boy. Well, maybe not a great reference, but you're not getting the altar boy to be the witness.
When you get a conspiracy, any conspiracy, it means that an individual who's going to testify at the behest of the prosecution, who's entered a plea deal, was a part of that conspiracy at one point. So, yes, it's something the defense hammers home, that they have an interest, a self-interest, in testifying to what the prosecutors want them to say. But it's not always dispositive because they also have the information. And I think prosecutors did a good job of taking the testimony of that witness and pairing it together with other evidence, other testimony, and other evidence that they got from his house, and put that all together and told a really compelling story.
You're always great the way you explain it. Thank you, Misty. And we'll see what happens with Menendez and with Alec Baldwin. I mentioned the